Page 1. The Collapse of Complex Societies, by Joseph Tainter, 1988. 0.1. Introduction to Collapse. Much of the central floodplain of the ancient Euphrates now lies beyond the frontiers of cultivation, a region of empty desolation. Tangled dunes, long disused canal levees, and the rubble-strewn mounds of former settlement contribute only low, featureless relief. Vegetation is sparse, and in many areas it is almost wholly absent. Rough, wind-eroded land surfaces and periodically flooded depressions form an irregular patchwork in all directions, discouraging any but the most committed traveler. To suggest the immediate impact of human life there is only a rare dent. Yet at one time here lay the heartland, the oldest urban, literate civilization in the world. A. Robert M.C.C. Adams, 1981, 17. We ascended by large stone steps, in some places perfect, and in others thrown down by trees which had grown up between the crevices. We followed our guide through the thick forest, among half-buried fragments, to 14 monuments. One displaced from its pedestal by enormous roots, another locked in the close embrace of branches of trees, and almost lifted out of the earth, another hurled to the ground, and bound down by huge vines and creepers, and one standing, with its altar before it, in a grove of trees which grew around it, seeming to shade and shroud it as a sacred thing. The only sounds that disturbed the quiet of this buried city were the noise of monkeys. H. John L. Stevens. 1850, 102-3. The image of lost civilizations is compelling, cities buried by drifting sands or tangled jungle, ruin and desolation where once there were people in abundance. Surely few persons can read such descriptions and not sense awe and mystery. Invariably we are spellbound, and want to know more. Who were these people and, particularly, what happened to them? How could flourishing civilizations have existed in what are now such devastated circumstances? Did the people degrade their environment, did the climate change, or did civil conflict lead to collapse? Did foreign invaders put these cities to an end? Or is there some mysterious, internal dynamic to the rise and fall of civilizations? Some of us are so fascinated by these questions that we devote our lives to studying them. Most people encounter the dilemma of fallen empires and devastated cities in casual reading, or in a school course. The image is troublesome to all, not only for the vast human endeavors that have mysteriously failed, but also for the enduring implication of these failures. The implication is clear: civilizations are fragile, impermanent things. This fact inevitably captures our attention, and however we might wish otherwise, prompts disturbing questions. Are modern societies similarly vulnerable? Is it likely, as Ortega asserts, that the possibility that a civilization should die doubles our own mortality, quoted in Mazzarino, 1966-171? Many of course prefer to believe that modern civilization, with its scientific and technological capacity, its energy resources, and its knowledge of economics and history, should be able to survive whatever crises ancient and simpler societies found insurmountable. But how firm is this belief? Many persons who have some awareness of history no doubt harbor the suspicion, as William voiced regarding the Roman Empire, that civilization can die, because it has already died once, quoted in Mazzarino, 1966, 174. To some historians of the early 20th century the twilight of Rome seemed almost a page of contemporary history, Mazzarino 1966, 173, Casson 1937, 183. This analogy has become deeply rooted in popular thought, and certainly persists today. It is even reflected in the writings of some modern competent authorities, for example, Isaac 1971. The irresistible allusion to ancient Rome has dominated the thinking of large numbers of people for 1.5 millennia, Mazzarino 1966. Were it not for this well-documented example of a powerful empire disintegrating, to which every Western school child is exposed, the fear of collapse would certainly be less widespread. As it is, those who are concerned about the future of industrial society, about its economic direction, its ecological basis, and its political superstructure, have an irrefutable illustration of the contention that civilizations, even powerful ones, are vulnerable. Why study collapse? Many social scientists might agree with Isaac. It goes without saying that the collapse of ancient civilization is the most outstanding event in its history. 1971, 11. Yet beyond scientific interest there is an additional reason. Collapse is a topic of the most widespread concern and the highest social significance. The reason why complex societies disintegrate is of vital importance to every member of one, and today that includes nearly the entire world population. Whether or not collapse was the most outstanding event of ancient history, few would care for it to become the most significant event of the present era. Even if one believes that modern societies are less vulnerable to collapse than ancient ones, the possibility that they may not be so remains troubling. In the absence of a systematic, scientific treatment of collapse, such concerns range untethered to any firm, reliable base. Disintegration of the social order has been a recurrent concern in Western history, and has often been expressed in a religious idiom. In the last few decades this concern has seemingly become rampant, and has achieved expression through a more secular form. A review of a recent exhibit of Mayan artifacts expressed popular thinking well. Some of the fascination of the Maya may lie in the legendary collapse of their culture several centuries before the Spanish conquest. Every thoughtful person who ponders the bureaucratic and technological pressures on ordinary life today must wonder whether it is possible for a society to strangle on its own complexities. Sensing that our own collective future is in jeopardy, we are hungry for historical analysis to help us imagine the direction events might take. Baker, 1986, 12. This concern crosses the social and intellectual spectrum, from the responsible scientists and business leaders who make up the Club of Rome, to the more extreme fringes of the survivalist movement. In between one finds a variety of serious, well-meaning persons, environmentalists, no-growth advocates, nuclear freeze proponents, and others. All fear, for one reason or another, that industrial civilization is in danger. Such fears are frequently based on historical analogy with past civilizations that have disappeared, and indeed it is sometimes suggested that we are about to go the way of the dinosaurs. Contemporary thinkers foresee collapse from such catastrophes as nuclear war, resource depletion, economic decline, ecological crises, or socio-political disintegration. For example, Meadows et al. 1972, Catton 1980, Turco et al. 1984. Only recently have such fears become widespread. As Dawson has noted, of all the changes that the 20th century has brought, none goes deeper than the disappearance of that unquestioning faith in the future and the absolute value of our civilization which was the dominant note of the 19th century, 1956, 54. Although collapse has been of interest for as long as societies have proven vulnerable, it has been a difficult mystery for historians and social scientists. Perhaps because of this, the development of political complexity has attracted more scholarly attention than collapse, its antithesis. Human history as a whole has been characterized by a seemingly inexorable trend toward higher levels of complexity, specialization, and socio-political control, processing of greater quantities of energy and information, formation of ever larger settlements, and development of more complex and capable technologies. This persistent aspect of our history has rightfully received an overwhelming amount of research, so that today we are beginning to understand how this came about. Yet the instances when this almost universal trend has been disrupted by collapse have not received a corresponding level of attention. To be sure, innumerable writers have produced myriad explanations of collapse, but even so, understanding disintegration has remained a distinctly minor concern in the social sciences. Explanations of collapse have tended to be ad hoc, pertaining only to one or a few societies, so that a general understanding remains elusive. At the same time, as will be shown, such theories have suffered in common from a number of conceptual and logical failings. When this study was begun, there was no reliable, universal explanation of collapse, no theory that would help us to understand most or all of its occurrences. It was indeed this state of affairs that prompted the present undertaking. The objective of this work then is to develop a general explanation of collapse, applicable in a variety of contexts, and with implications for current conditions. This is a work of archaeology and history, but more basically of social theory. The approach is to first introduce and exemplify collapse, and then in Chapter 2 to briefly examine the nature of complex societies. Chapter 3 discusses and evaluates existing approaches to understanding collapse. A general explanation is developed in Chapter 4, and evaluated by case studies in Chapter 5. A concluding chapter further discusses the proposed explanation, synthesizes the work, and raises some implications for the contemporary scene. Page 16.